The next problem in our categorical logic homework is problem number 15. And again, same instructions. Translate the following standard into standard form categorical propositions. Our sentence, Joseph J. Thomson discovered the electron. So what we'll notice right away is that discovered is a non-standard verb, and Joseph J. Thomson is not a class of things. So this is a singular proposition with a non-standard verb. We're going to want to change it. We'll specify a class that contains only Joseph J. Thomson as a member, because our categorical logic has to be a class of, or a logic of classes. So we're going to use a universal affirmative statement. We're going to introduce the phrase person identical to Joseph J. Thomson to pick out Joseph J. Thomson as a class containing only Joseph J. Thomson. We'll then fold our discovered non-standard verb into a description of our predicate class. And that'll give us something like the following. All people identical to Joseph J. Thomson, universal quantifier, subject term, picks out a class of things, are copula consistent with our quantifier, people who discovered the electron. We fold that non-standard verb into our predicate term. Our predicate term needs to be a class of things, and so we introduce people who discovered the electron as our class of things. Our next problem is number 30. A pesticide is dangerous if it contains DDT. So we should notice immediately that this is a conditional statement. Conditional statements are propositional statements. They relate the truth of an antecedent to the truth of a consequent. So to translate a conditional statement, we have to identify the antecedent. We want the antecedent to be described using a subject term. We'll have a universal quantifier. The antecedent is our subject term, copula consistent with that quantifier, and then we'll have our consequent described as a class of things or our predicate term. So when we identify our antecedent in this conditional, it will be what follows our if word. If it contains DDT, it is a pronoun. We'll have to introduce a person, place, or thing. We're talking about pesticides. Hence, we want to introduce a phrase that is consistent with that. Pesticides works fine, and so we'll get all pesticides containing DDT, universal quantifier, subject term specifying a class that picks out the things that would make our antecedent clause true, are copula consistent with our quantifier. Finally, dangerous pesticides, that picks out a class of things that would make the consequent class true. Our next problem would be problem number 42. Monkeys are mammals. Again, we're translating the sentence into a standard form categorical proposition. Here we have monkeys, that's a perfectly good class of things. We have mammals, perfectly good class of things. Are, perfectly good copula, so long as it's consistent with a quantifier. We're missing a quantifier. So we have to ask ourselves what we think the implicit quantification is in this sentence. Is it some monkeys are mammals? That doesn't seem likely. Is it all monkeys are mammals? That seems much more likely. We introduce our quantifier and we get the following statement. All monkeys are mammals. The next problem is number 45. And this sentence says, not every river runs into the sea. Two things we should notice. We have every, that specifies a quantity. It suggests a universal. We have a negation. That negation is outside our quantifier word, so it seems to negate the entire sentence. So we might want to put that negation aside and ask ourselves, what does this sentence say without that not there? Every river runs into the sea. If we were going to translate that, we would say all rivers are rivers that run into the sea. Since this says that is not true, we need to introduce a negation. It's a negation of a universal. Our contradictory relation tells us that that's going to be a particular. The universal is a universal affirmative, so our translation would be a particular negative. And we get some rivers are not rivers that run into the sea. And so when we look at that translation, we go back to what the original English sentence said, and we say, okay, let's see. Not every river runs into the sea. That's only going to be true if there's at least one river that is not a river that runs into the sea. And so it looks like we've got a good translation there. Particular standard form quantifier. Rivers are subject term, picks out a class of things. Are not copula consistent with our quantifier. And rivers that run into the sea, that is our predicate term that picks out a class of things. Our final problem is from the second section, problem number 8. Our instructions here tell us that the following exercises contain typical mistakes that students make in attempting to translate statements into standard form. It instructs us to correct the errors and redundancies in these attempted translations. So we want to look at this translation and see why it isn't a good translation, and then introduce our correction. Here's our sentence. All companies identical to Microsoft are looking forward to a bright future. So we can go through it systematically. We've got all as a perfectly good standard form quantifier. Companies identical to Microsoft, that's a perfectly good subject term. It takes that particular company and it creates a class that contains only that company as a member. That all looks good. R, that's a copula consistent with our universal affirmative quantifier. Finally, we've got looking forward to a bright future. Here looks like is where our problem emerges. Looking forward to a bright future isn't a class of things. You don't run to the grocery store and get a 6-pack of looking forward to a bright future. You don't bake looking forward to a bright future. You don't trade it online, and so on. And so we need to introduce a noun phrase to make that a predicate term that picks out a class of things. We can modify our original sentence then by introducing an appropriate noun phrase. All companies identical to Microsoft are businesses looking forward to a bright future, are companies looking forward to a bright future, are organizations looking forward to a bright future. Anything that's consistent with the idea that we're talking about companies identical to Microsoft in our subject class.